Hi, everyone, and welcome back. This is Alexander Lim, and we are on another episode of AuthorStory. Our featured book for this episode is The Infield Fly Rule is in Effect, The History and Strategy of Baseball's Most Infamous Rule, which you can check out right now by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. The author, Howard M. Wasserman, is a professor of law at the Florida International University's College of Law, where he has been teaching since 2003. So, Howard, welcome to Author Story. Thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you for having me.
All right, cool. So, first off, I really have to get this out of the way. You cover and teach a lot of things in law: evidence, civil procedure, civil rights, federal courts, so on and so forth. From what I've seen, you've even written books on civil rights and social legal institutional failures. Why write a book on baseball?
I've always been a huge baseball fan since I was little.
Okay.
I've always had a fascination with the infield fly rule, which I found as a law student is shared by a lot of law professors.
Hmm.
There's a fascination with baseball rules and with the infield fly rule in particular.
Hmm.
And there's something of a cottage industry of legal scholars who try to use sports to illustrate legal concepts,
Hmm.
and that was really what and my interest in writing about the infield fly, in particularly writing about the infield fly rule, came about off of one particular play in 2012,
Hmm.
play in the National League wildcard game in 2012, that I wrote about just as an illustration of how sport, as an example of
Hmm.
how sports illustrate legal principles.
Hmm.
And that I got to that one, it was written as the response to that post me down the rabbit hole of 6 years later, leading to this book.
Okay. All right. Okay. And I find that interesting. What is it about? I get that, use sports to help illustrate legal concepts because, people are more familiar with sports, I'm sure, than with legal concepts. What is it in particular about baseball that would lend it to you're using it as a venue to explore legal concepts, to explain these?
I in the book I uh, quote something that another law professor wrote, or three law professors wrote in a book on the American legal mind. It's
Mm-hmm.
that basically legalistic game. There's a lot of rules,
Mm.
uh, and there is a call made on a rule on each and everything that happens. There
Mm-hmm.
is always, and the game moves at a slow enough pace where you can see each being made,
Mm-hmm.
can see evoked by the. So when a routine ground out to shortstop,
Mm-hmm.
the the, the that the base runner is out, the umpire still makes a call. It's
Mm-hmm.
obvious that the ball's in foul territory. The umpire still makes a call. The pitch goes all the way to the backstop. The umpire makes the call of the ball. And
Right.
so those are constantly being invoked on each and every play,
Mm-hmm.
and done in a very obvious way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's time to think about it. I think it that's what helps it lend itself to the sort of legal study that that law professors do.
Mm. Okay, interesting. So, so I'm just curious, is this kind of legalism present in other sports, like say football or maybe even soccer?
There's a little bit. I'm sure if you talk to a law professor in England, his focus would probably be on soccer
Mm.
rather than baseball.
Okay.
There is a little bit of there's a little bit of it in other sports, particularly in basketball. Football is basically just criticized as being rule bound to the point of incomprehensibility. The big complaint about
Okay.
football is that there were too many rules and they're too inexplicable.
Okay,
Uh,
all right.
there's law professors who are working on a book actually
Mhm.
that typically is designed for a course, a law school class uses courts to illustrate legal concepts. So it's an interesting idea.
Okay.
Ended up what I here ended up being more tied into the rules of baseball itself, not as any great illustration of broader legal principle.
Mm, okay, okay, I got that. So about the book itself, what made you decide to write the infield fly rule? Was it something you decided to write because of an aha moment you had, or was it more like a, a slow realization over time that, I gotta write this thing?
I honestly, I had never thought of writing about it until, as I mentioned, that the infield fly play in the 2012 National League wildcard game,
Right.
and it was a particularly controversial call
Mm-hmm.
where the rule was invoked on a ball that was hit pretty far into the outfield.
Mm-hmm.
It started a broad conversation among sports fans about this being the worst call in history,
Mm-hmm.
and then a conversation about the infield fly rule itself. And one of the things that surprised me was in the wake of that call, seeing a lot of comments, including in emails to me in response to things that I had written,
Mm-hmm.
comments not that this particular call was wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
rather comments that we need to just get rid of the infield fly rule. It's a dumb
Mm-hmm.
rule, don't need it, it's unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so the path that led me down was, well, let me figure out and try to construct an argument for why we have this rule, and sort of try and reverse engineer the rule to come up with a justification and explanation for why we, and of thinking about that and thinking about the infield fly rule itself, thinking about other situations in baseball, thinking about other situations in other sports, thinking about how often it arose and therefore whether it's a real problem,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that just sort of morphed and formed itself into the book.
All right. Okay. Cool. All right. Got that. So, Howard, quite a few of our listeners may be somewhat familiar with baseball, but they may not be familiar with the infield fly rule. So, can you just summarize what it is, what it's all about?
Yeah, so what the infield fly rule says is that when the batting team has runners on first and second or the bases loaded with
Mm-hmm.
less than 2 outs in an inning,
Mm-hmm.
and the batter hits a fair fly ball that is playable by an infielder with ordinary effort. It's a ball that an infielder could catch easily.
Mm-hmm.
The batter is called out, regardless of whether the fielder catches the ball or not.
Mm-hmm.
The base runners can run at their own risk if the ball is dropped, but if the ball is not caught, but if the ball isn't caught, the base runners do not have to advance; they can stay put.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind the rule is that without it, an infielder could intentionally not catch that fair fly ball, just allow
Okay.
it to hit the ground, and then get a double play on the multiple base runners
Mm-hmm.
who rule would be forced to advance. But if the ball is hit so close to the infield that it's playable by an infielder with ordinary effort,
Mm-hmm.
then it's there's no way the base runners are going to beat the throws for that double play.
Mm-hmm.
So one newspaper article from 1911 describes it as the base runners being up a tree, which is a nice early 20th century euphemism.
Right.
And so the rule is designed to protect the offense and keep the defense from being able to pull off that play.
Mm-hmm.
Because the batter and the runners not being allowed to advance, there's no reason for the infielder not to catch the ball.
Okay, right. So I'm just curious with this one. So is there a rule that states that, with something like this, the runners have to advance? I mean, that's why they're up a tree?
Well, sure. I mean, the ordinary rules of baseball are that if a batted ball hits the ground,
Hmm.
if the batted ball hits the ground in fair territory and the batter becomes a base runner, then the runners on the bases immediately in front of him are forced to advance.
Ah,
So the batter's a runner who's going to first base, so the runner on first has to advance to second, the runner on second has to advance to third.
right.
And when they're forced to advance, that's what we mean by force out. They are out at the next base simply if the ball is thrown to the next base before they can get there.
Mm,
And so that's how baseball ordinarily works.
mm,
That's the ordinary framework and the ordinary structure of baseball.
right.
And so the idea here is that even if this ball does hit the ground, we're going to call the batter out so he doesn't become a runner, and
Hmm.
now the runners on first and second aren't forced to advance.
Mm,
So we're likely what happened when a ball on the ground in fair territory.
mm. Okay. So it seems that this infield fly rule is intended to address a specific case, a specific scenario, then rather than just rule for the heck of it.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's a very specific scenario. It's where there are force outs on multiple bases and less than two out,
Mhm.
which are the situations in which the infield would have an incentive to try to get multiple outs on the play, and where if the ball lands on the ground, there's an opportunity to get uh, multiple base runners out on the force play. And so
Right.
that's why it's limited to only first and second or the bases loaded, because you can get multiple outs on base runners,
Hmm.
and it's limited to less than two outs because it's only the situation in which the defense has an incentive to to intentionally not catch the ball in order to get multiple outs. But it
Okay.
is very specific to that situation. And so
Mm,
one of the things that prompted my interest in writing about this was a lot of suggestions by people that, well, we have the rule for this situation, but
hmm.
we don't have the rule for these other situations that are very similar
Hmm.
to the fly. So if we don't have the rule in these situations, why should we have it in the infield fly situation? And so one of the things that I set out to explore was what's unique about the infield fly situation. What is it about this situation that's different from virtually anything else that is going to arise in baseball?
Okay, so I can kind of see the confusion here, because I mean this, like, the infield fly rule is meant for a specific situation, but there's also some, I guess, some confusion as well as when it should be played, and if, as you mentioned, if it should be used at all.
Right. No, and there's definitely some confusion, and I think that triggered a lot of the conversation that followed in the wake of that play in 2012. So a lot of people don't understand, for example, that although it's called the infield fly, it applies to any ball that could be caught by an infielder, even if it's pretty far into the outfield.
Hmm.
Um, there is some misunderstanding that the infield fly could be invoked even if the ball is caught by an outfielder.
Hmm.
I looked at 8 seasons worth of infield fly calls, and there was one play where that happened, where the left fielder was charging in to catch a ball in shallow left field, and the shortstop was standing right there. They
Hmm.
both had a play on the ball. The left fielder was the one who caught it, but the umpire still invoked infield fly. So
Mm.
there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the rule actually says and what the rule actually does, which was somewhat the fun of really of trying to dig in and get into the weeds of the rule to consider everything about what it does and does not reach.
Right, right. And I mean, from what you tell me, it seems that, I mean, I guess even the umpires aren't really aware of the rationale behind the infield fly rule.
It's interesting. Some of them still. So the rationale that was talked about in when the rule was first put in place in the 1890s
Right?
was largely about sportsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it seemed unsporting
Mm-hmm.
for a player to intentionally not catch the ball,
Right.
and it was deceptive, and it was the defense fooling the offense, and we don't want that. And a few of the people I've talked to have come back to that deception rationale,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that was there. That was certainly there in the beginning. Part of the problem with the deception rationale is baseball is all about deception. There's a lot of deception that goes into baseball. And
Right.
so the argument is if we allow these forms of deception, why don't we allow deception here?
Right.
And the answer, I think, has to be well, because it's not really about preventing deception, or it's not only about presenting deception. There's another concern, and that other concern is the cost benefit imbalance on the play.
Mm-hmm. And what do you mean by that cost benefit balance?
The the end result of the play, the say how to put this, the
Okay.
ordinary result fly on an playable fair fly ball is that the infielder is going to catch the ball,
Mm-hmm.
the batter will be out, runners will stay put. So
Mm-hmm.
the expected result on that play is one out. That's what everybody would
Right.
expect from a routine, easily playable fly ball that's hit to an infielder.
Right.
With infield rule, fielder would have the opportunity and the incentive to not catch the ball and try to get multiple outs on the base runners.
Mm-hmm.
And the base thing to prevent the play, and
Mm-hmm.
so to prevent from happening. But you end up with a situation is instead of getting one on an easily playable fly ball, the defense potentially gets two, maybe even three outs. A triple play is possible on this play. In that the op team really can't do anything to prevent. So what you end up with is these great benefits to the defense, multiple outs, maybe getting out of the, instead of only one, with no real costs.
Mm-hmm.
And on the side for the batting team, they incur all these costs, multiple outs on this and no benefits on the play, and really nothing that they can do to prevent it from happening. So it's that imbalance that I argue triggers the rule, or triggers the need for a special rule in this unique situation.
Mm, okay, okay, okay. I got that. I got that. So, we talk about the infield fly rules. So I'm just curious. Have you checked on any other baseball rules that might be, as confusing as the infield fly rule, but which make common sense when you think about it?
Not ones that are as confusing as the infield fly rule, and I
Okay.
think what's special about the infield fly rule is it's known by name. It's
Uh-huh.
I think one of the few rules in sports that has its own name.
Hmm.
The one that's most talked about that has its own name that is not in baseball is offside in soccer. I think that's
Hmm.
the counterpart in terms of fame.
Hmm.
The equivalent of the infield fly rule is offside in soccer. So not other rules that are quite as confusing, but other rules that and other game situations that might raise some similar concerns to the concerns that the infield fly situation raises. And so I looked at what the rules are that govern those situations, whether the rules are similar, and
Hmm.
whether the situations are really similar to the infield fly.
Okay, okay. Interesting, interesting. So, So, I while doing research for this interview, I came across some other papers where stuff like the infield fly rule could be applied to sports as well as economics. I remember one like the economics to infield fly rule. This this may be a bit, a little out of left field, but how can is the infield fly rule or something like it appropriate in other uh in say as a use as a legal metaphor?
Courts certainly seem to think it is. It comes up a lot. I've seen court cases where they've likened certain rules governing employment discrimination to the infield fly rule,
Mm.
rules governing tax law to the infield fly rule. So judges have certainly tried to run with it because judges like a good sports metaphor when they can fit one in.
Okay, okay. I just found it a little strange is all. This is baseball and legal. You wouldn't think, as a layman, I wouldn't really think that those two roles would overlap, but apparently they do.
Lawyers are huge baseball fans. I think for a lot of the reasons that we talked about at the beginning of the interview, that baseball is a very legalistic game that you can take the time to observe everything about. Lawyers, law professors, baseball's a big thing. Judges, baseball's a big thing. So there's a lot of that judges do where they try to use baseball in particular for its metaphorical power. I mean, we can go back to John Roberts's confirmation hearing when he was nominated as Chief Justice,
Mhm,
and he famously said that the role of the umpire is just to call balls and strikes.
mhm.
And Roberts, I think, was rightfully criticized because the the metaphor that he was trying to make doesn't work. It doesn't reflect what judges really do.
Mhm.
But it was telling that the metaphor that he went for was balls and strikes, and he
Right,
went for baseball.
right. Okay, all right. That's very interesting right there. Okay, so Howard, let's say you came across someone who is, interested in both legal and sports, and you had only enough time to tell this person one thing about the possible interplay or the possible use of sports in legal metaphors. What would be that one thing you'd tell that person?
Don't take the metaphors too seriously
Okay.
because the metaphors very often are strained and are done just because the judge wants to punch things up.
Hmm.
And I would use the Roberts confirmation hearing as an example.
Right.
I would say that the idea of using not as a metaphor, but where sports are useful is you can explore you can explore legal concepts through sports rules because
Mm-hmm.
law essentially, I remember telling my daughter's kindergarten class this years ago, law is essentially the study of law is the study of rules.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have rules that can govern anything. It's rules that govern a society, it can be rules that govern a game,
Mm-hmm.
it can be rules that govern a sport. And
Mm-hmm.
in all of them you have rules. The rules have to be understood and interpreted and applied to allow the society or the game to function.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what's happening. So you can you have to understand what a ball or a strike is
All right.
to to have a baseball game, and there's a certain bit of essentially legal analysis that goes into it. It's happening on the spot,
Right.
but it's a bit of legal analysis that is going on. Rules are adopted for the same reasons in society as they are in a sport, to
Mm-hmm.
make it run smoother, to allow it to serve the purpose that it's supposed to serve.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting things about the infield fly rule is, and this was the first thing that I was interested in writing about specifically to the rule, is that it illustrates the difference between two different ways of interpreting a statute. So
Mm-hmm.
one way, what's called textualism, where you just look at the rules on the page, or
Mm-hmm.
the words on the page. And another is purposivism, where you look at the words on the page, but you also take into account the purpose of the rule, why this rule is here,
Mm-hmm.
what the rule makers hope to do with this rule or hope to achieve with this rule.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about that in deciding whether the rule applies to a situation.
Mm-hmm.
So to go back to that play in the 2012 National League wild card, the ball was hit pretty far out into left field,
Mm-hmm.
but the shortstop was out there and he was under the ball and he was in position to catch the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just looked at the text,
Mm-hmm.
the call was right.
Mm-hmm.
There were runners on first and second. There were less than two out, and it was a fair fly ball that was playable by an infielder with ordinary effort. Would have been a pretty easy play for him to make.
Yeah, he was out there already.
And so, right. And so, looking just at the text, okay, that call is correct.
Mm-hmm.
If you also look at the purpose, well, the purpose of the rule is to prevent that unsportsmanlike, deceptive double play on the base runners.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you watch this play, the ball was hit far enough into the outfield that both base runners had advanced halfway to the next base.
Mm-hmm.
So when the ball fell to the ground, they simply ran to the next base,
Mm-hmm.
and there was no way that the defense was going to be able to turn a double play on it, even if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the purpose of the rule, preventing the double play,
Mm-hmm.
you look at it and say, well, yeah, the text would say you apply the rule here, but if we consider the purpose, we won't apply the rule here because the purpose, the evil that the rule is designed to prevent, that
Mm-hmm.
cheap double play, just isn't going to happen on this play.
Right.
And so the umpires go through that process in deciding whether or not to invoke the infield fly. They look at the play in light of the text, but they also will take into account, okay, is this ball hit so far out into the outfield that even if this guy were to intentionally drop it, there's no way he could get a double play because the ball's just hit too far away. And if that's the case, some umpires will say, not going to invoke.
Right. Okay.
In that, purpose is leading me to a different conclusion. That the purpose of the rule is leading me to a different conclusion than the text is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something deal with, and that's something that umpires deal with the infield fly rule, and it's frankly something that judges, bring it back to what sports rules tell us about law, it's something that judges will occasionally deal with in trying to apply a particular law.
Mm-hmm.
What is the purpose of it tell us?
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, it's when I looked at that way, yeah, I can see the similarities, the parallels, definitely. So, Howard, in the last minute or so of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share to inspire listeners? Anything at all?
I hope they will, if they look at the book, that they then will start watching baseball with a renewed appreciation and for the intricacies of the rules, and in particular, this rule I am now uniquely keyed in whenever I watch a game to when there is an infield fly situation, and so is my daughter because she now has picked up on she's picked up on the same fascination.
All right, great. I got that. Great. Okay, then. So, in closing, the book is The Infield Fly Rule is, in effect, the history and strategy of baseball's most infamous rule. The authors are guests, Mr. Howard Wasserman, and you can find his book on Amazon. So, Howard, thank you very much for being an author story. I must say it was very enlightening, particularly with regards to parallels between baseball and the legal profession.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And there it is, folks. So please check out the Infield Fly Rules in Effect, as well as some of our other authors and books that we've covered on AuthorStory. And heck, by all means, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. So see you guys all next time on AuthorStory, where we speak to another great author and another awesome book.